The Four Agreements were created by a man named Don Miguel Ruiz. He was part of the Toltec, which were known as the women and men of great knowledge. He gives four principles to practice in order to create love and happiness in your life. The four agreements are: be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally, don't make assumptions, and always do your best. This can be shown through the ideological framework of you are a spirit, you steward a soul, and which is your meaning-making center, and you reside in a soma, that's your memory-making center. Both were very important to me to learn and connect together. When you fully understand yourself and others, it's when you understand this framework and live through these four agreements. Throughout this whole experience, one thing I decided to really focus on was to not make assumptions. It was something I thought about often and tried to incorporate in and out of the classroom. When I say don't make assumptions, there are many aspects of this. When you don't make assumptions, you ask questions. I think that's a big part of this because a lot of people find that challenging. I know I did at the beginning of the seminar. It's kind of, you're like putting yourself out there. You're putting yourself out there for people to get offended. But if you ask questions, you begin to build a personhood that is based on them and not what you are thinking of them. Another big part of not making assumptions is removing your judgments. They happen so quickly and immediately, can almost feel out of your control. But if you disregard those feelings and stop those judgments, so much good can come from this because you are finally in control of your own thoughts. Coming into this class and before I was conscious of the four agreements, I had so many assumptions about this class. For example, I reread my second one-pager and I wrote about how worried I was about the violence that could happen in my practicum site. And I also said that because the students were going to be a different race than me, I was worried that I wouldn't be able to make connections with them. It's almost painful to think about how subconsciously racist I was being in those thoughts. The white supremacist patriarchy teaches people, for example, a young white girl like me, that people of color are different and that we wouldn't be able to get along. It creates this divide that we see in society that this ideology thrives on. I had an experience with a student that really showed me how important, especially as a teacher, not making assumptions is. A very powerful and heavily reflected moment for me was when I was rewatching my Snapchats and I noticed a pattern with this boy named Jared in my class. On the first day, I would say that he was very quiet. He was falling asleep. He was not completing any of his classwork. And as I continued to observe him the next couple of days, he continued a similar pattern of behavior. At that moment, I could easily have made judgments about him and assumed, this kid doesn't like science, he doesn't care about his grade, but I didn't. And on Friday, my teacher decided to do a fun project that connected hormones with a creative mini project where they could draw, they could write raps, they could create a story, and they could write a play. And on that day, Jared completely changed. He was so interested in this project. He was an amazing drawer, and he got so excited that he was able to show those skills and draw while learning. It was a big moment for me because I realized that students might not like the lesson you make one day, but they could really love the lesson you make the next day. And I'm really glad that I didn't just assume that Jared didn't like science, but instead, I wonder if he just doesn't like to write classwork worksheets. He doesn't like writing notes. When you assume, you can limit your imagination of what a student could do, and that can be really dangerous. Instead, you should try new things, and stretch yourself as a teacher to find out what works for each student so that every student has the opportunity to learn what you're trying to teach in your classroom. Another powerful and an upsetting moment for me was an interaction I watched with my mentor teacher and one of her students. Now, this student was showing clear visual signs of extreme exhaustion. He was falling asleep the whole class, really having trouble staying awake. And the whole class, I had a lot of wonderings about why he was so tired and unable to stay awake. And my teacher continuously asked him, pick up your head, wake up. And he would usually roll his eyes, talk back to her. And at one point, my mentor teacher called him out for sleeping during his classwork time and not getting his work done. And he said back to her, I already did it. And she got really mad at him and said that was impossible. He's been asleep the whole time, and wrote him a demerit card. I walked over to him a little bit later and looked at his paper, and not only had he completely finished all the work, it was all mostly correct, too. It was a powerful moment for me because clearly this kid cared about his grade and was doing the best he could do in that class. The best doesn't always look the same, and sometimes you need naps. Sometimes you need time to just relax and put your head down and not be constantly doing work. And I think it's really important for teachers to learn about their students and understand the reason for their actions. These students are all doing stewardship in a soul and residing in somas and are continuously making meaning and memories. We don't know everything that's going on in their mind. I remember one thing that Dr. Staples said was, think about yourself. Think about how much is going on in your mind. And then times that by as many students as you have. That's how much is going on in those bodies. We must try to ask questions and learn about these students before we make any assumptions about what they're doing. And I definitely learned that in that moment.
All these assumptions and judgments that we might make really can play into a much larger picture that causes these macroaggressions to occur and these systemic, aggressions of racism and sexism and just all these awful things could just be stopped with asking more questions, putting yourself in someone else's shoes, understanding, wondering about people, instead of just saying, they're this, say, I wonder why they're this, asking questions really could change everything. And I think that's something I'm learning and something I'm trying to do, and I feel finally that I could really make a difference with it.
Looking at my experiences, my old video, and my notes from my journal, I am such a different person than when I first came to the seminar. Not making assumptions is a really big change from where I was 2 weeks ago. I really feel like now I have the skills to think critically about society, about the white supremacist patriarchal ideology, about the systemic aggressions that I see, and become the advocate that I've always wanted to be. I now know how intertwined, adaptable, and illusory the white supremacist patriarchy is. Once you know that, you begin to see it in places you've never seen before. I definitely noticed it in my classroom, and even now that I'm back home, I can start to critically look at my life and see things that I've never seen before that need a change. My vow for life and for love is to be committed to create space for each of my students to grow without judgment or assumptions. This ties perfectly with my vow to not make assumptions, as said in the 4 agreements. I cannot wait to continue using all the amazing skills gained in this class throughout my life and my career as a teacher. I have never been more excited to be a teacher than right now.